The message I sent was simple, nothing extraordinary, the kind of text families exchange every day. Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up? I dropped it in the family group chat at noon while waiting in the departure lounge. My thumbs tapped the words casually, as if they carried no weight, as if it was just another routine request. I didn't know then that those harmless words would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. My name is Daniel, I'm 32, and for most of my life I thought my family was unshakable. My mother, the quiet glue that held us all together. My father, stern but dependable. And my brother, Michael, 2 years younger than me, reckless at times but my closest confidant. Or at least, that's what I believed. The plane hummed under my seat as I glanced at my phone. The group chat lit up with the familiar profile icons. Mom's selfie where she wore her church hat, Dad's picture of his dog-eared Bible, and Michael's grinning face holding up a glass of beer. A small comfort before a long flight home. I expected quick replies, maybe even an argument over who had the time to come. That was how it always went, teasing, shuffling responsibility, but in the end someone always showed up. Mom replied first. I have choir rehearsal today. Sorry, sweetheart, can't make it. Then Dad, long day at work. My knees are acting up. Maybe Mike can swing by? And then silence. The familiar bubble showing Michael was typing blinked, disappeared, blinked again. Finally, his reply came through. Not my problem. Find your own ride. I stared at the words, convinced for a moment that it was some kind of joke. Michael was known for sarcasm, for poking at me until I rolled my eyes, but there was no winking emoji, no laughing face. Just those 5 sharp words that cut deeper the more I read them. Not my problem. Find your own ride. The plane announcement echoed overhead, boarding began, but I couldn't move. My chest tightened with something I couldn't quite name, confusion laced with an odd sting of betrayal. Why would my brother, of all people, send that? Why so cold? Why so final? I shoved the phone into my pocket and forced myself to get on the plane. My mind raced the entire flight, trying to brush it off, trying to rationalize it. Maybe he was in a bad mood. Maybe something happened at work. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to touch, I felt the first crack open. By the time we landed, dusk had already draped the city. I wheeled my carry-on into the humid air, scanning the terminal exit for that familiar face I had always trusted would be there. But there was nothing. No car. No brother. No welcome home. And then, as I stood there alone, my phone buzzed again with a new message from Michael. This one made my stomach drop so hard I almost let go of my suitcase. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't sarcasm. It was something far worse. And that was the moment I knew my brother had just declared war. I couldn't stop replaying Michael's words as I dragged my suitcase through the terminal. The sliding doors opened and warm evening air rushed over me, thick with exhaust fumes from taxis idling at the curb. I pulled my phone from my pocket, almost against my will, to stare at the group chat again. Mom had sent a praying hands emoji after Michael's message, as though to smooth things over. Dad hadn't said anything at all. And Michael's words sat there, heavy and cold, not my problem. Find your own ride. For a second I considered calling him. Maybe he'd answer with laughter in his voice, tell me I was too sensitive, that I should have known he was joking. But something inside me whispered not to. His message wasn't typed in jest, it was deliberate. There was a chill in the simplicity of it. So I called a cab. The ride home was quiet. I sat in the back, watching the city blur past. My hometown looked the same, the neon buzz of corner stores, the crumbling sidewalks, the clusters of teenagers on bikes who seemed immune to the years. Yet nothing felt familiar anymore. My brother's words clung to me, twisting a knot in my stomach. When the cab pulled into my parents' driveway, the house looked smaller than I remembered. The porch light glowed against peeling paint, and through the living room window I could see Mom moving around, fussing with something on the table. She met me at the door with her usual smile, but her hug felt too quick, her warmth shadowed by an undercurrent I couldn't name. You made it home safe, she said softly, almost like she was apologizing for something. Dad was in his recliner, the television washing his face in pale light. He gave a nod, a distracted welcome. No one mentioned Michael. No one explained his message. We ate dinner together, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, overcooked green beans. It was the same as every homecoming meal I'd ever had, except the silence was heavier. Mom asked about my flight, Dad muttered something about the game on TV, but no one asked about the thing that sat in my chest like a stone. Finally I asked, "Where's Mike?" Mom froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. Dad cleared his throat but kept his eyes on the screen. "He's busy," Mom said carefully. "Busy. That was it. That was all I got." Later that night, lying on the bed I had slept in since I was a boy, I scrolled back through the chat again. My mind kept circling, restless. Why would my brother write something so cruel? Why would Mom and Dad just let it hang there, unchallenged? And then, buried in the notifications, I saw a private message from Michael. It had come through while I was in the cab. "You should have stayed away. Don't say I didn't warn you." I sat up in the dark, staring at those words, my pulse hammering in my ears. What did he mean by that? Warn me about what? The more I thought about it, the more the air in that room felt wrong, like I was sleeping under a roof that no longer belonged to me. That message wasn't just hostility. It was a warning, almost a threat. And suddenly I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider. Michael wasn't lashing out in some random fit of anger. He was hiding something. And whatever it was, it had to do with me. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the old house sounded like a secret being whispered behind my back. Every shadow on the wall looked like a hand pointing towards something I wasn't supposed to see. By the time morning broke, I knew one thing with certainty. If my brother wanted me to stay away, then he was terrified of what I might discover by coming closer. And that was exactly why I had to find out what he was hiding. The next morning I woke to the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. For a moment I almost let myself believe things were normal again. But then I remembered Michael's words, "You should have stayed away. Don't say I didn't warn you to," and the air seemed to tighten around me. Mom was already at the stove when I walked in, humming faintly as she scrambled eggs. She greeted me with a smile, but her eyes flicked quickly toward my phone on the counter, as if she knew I'd been staring at Michael's message half the night. Dad sat at the table, thumbing through the newspaper, pretending he didn't notice the quiet tension pressing between us. "Sleep well?" Mom asked. "Not really," I answered. "Where's Mike?" Her spatula paused midair, grease dripping into the pan. "He had to leave early," she said quickly. "Work." But the way she avoided my eyes told me it was a lie. I sat at the table and forced myself to eat, though the eggs tasted like ash in my mouth. My brother was avoiding me. That much was clear. And my parents were covering for him. For what? Later that day I decided to take a walk, let my feet carry me through the neighborhood streets I hadn't seen in months. The cracked sidewalks, the leaning fences, the kids chasing each other with water guns, it all felt both familiar and foreign. But as I rounded the corner onto Maple Avenue, I spotted something that made my stomach jolt. Michael's car, parked outside O'Malley's bar. At 10 in the morning, I stood across the street, half hidden behind a lamppost, watching. My brother stumbled out the door a moment later, pulling a cigarette from his pocket. His eyes looked hollow, his jaw tense, like he hadn't slept in days. He lit up, inhaled hard, then pulled out his phone. For a second I thought he might see me, but he didn't look up. He just typed something furiously, cursed under his breath, and then disappeared back inside. That wasn't work. That was hiding. I walked back home with 100 questions burning through my chest. What was Michael mixed up in? Why would he push me away the moment I came back? And why did it feel like Mom and Dad already knew the answers, but were too afraid to tell me? That night, as the house quieted and the familiar creaks echoed through the walls, I decided to go through the group chat again. I scrolled up, past months of old messages. Birthday wishes, photos of dinners, jokes about Dad's clumsy attempts at technology. And then I noticed something strange. Gaps. Whole weeks with no messages. Times when I knew Mom would have been sharing church updates, or when Dad would have dropped a line about the game. The pattern didn't feel natural. It felt scrubbed. Had someone deleted messages? The thought made my skin prickle. Families didn't just erase things from the group chat, unless they had something to hide. As I sat there, staring at those empty gaps, I realized I had stumbled onto my first breadcrumb. My brother wasn't just avoiding me, he was afraid of what I might see if I looked too closely. And my parents, whether they liked it or not, were helping him keep it buried. But here's the thing about secrets. They rot when you try to hide them. And I could already smell something foul. I knew I had to dig deeper. I had to find out what Michael had erased from our lives. And if you've been listening this far, if you feel that same knot in your stomach tightening like I do, then don't just sit back. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me. Because what I'm about to uncover in the next chapter isn't just a family squabble. It's betrayal. The kind you can't come back from. The following day I woke earlier than usual, restless, the image of Michael outside that bar still stamped in my mind. I slipped my phone from the nightstand and opened the group chat again. Those gaps in the history glared at me like missing teeth in a smile. They weren't accidents. Someone had gone through and pulled out pieces of our family's timeline, erased them as though they'd never existed. I couldn't shake the thought that the missing messages were connected to me. Maybe something had been said, some plan or confession, and someone, Michael most likely, didn't want me to see it. When I walked into the kitchen, Mom was already pouring coffee. She looked up at me with tired eyes, and for the first time I noticed how worn she seemed. Like she had been holding something heavy for a long time. "Your brother's been under stress," she said without prompting, as though she could read the questions waiting on my tongue. "What kind of stress?" I asked. She hesitated. The silence stretched. "Work, money, you know how it is." It was a weak excuse and she knew I knew it. But instead of pushing, I let it drop. At least for the moment. That afternoon, when Mom and Dad were out, I slipped into Michael's old room. It was the same space we'd shared growing up, though now only his things remained. An unmade bed, a cluttered desk, stacks of unpaid bills shoved into drawers. I rummaged quietly, feeling a tremor in my hands. And then I found it. An envelope buried under a pile of receipts. Inside was a printed bank statement, Michael's name at the top. My eyes scanned the lines until one detail froze me cold. Large withdrawals. Repeated, irregular, and in amounts too exact to be accidental. 500 here, 1,000 there, sometimes more. Always in cash. And next to some of the withdrawals, in the memo section, there was a word, Daniel. My name. I stood there in that room, the paper trembling in my grip. Why would my name appear on Michael's bank statement? Why was he pulling money and attaching me to it? A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun, heart hammering, and there he was, Michael, standing in the doorway, eyes dark, lips twisted in a thin smile. "You shouldn't be in here," he said, his voice low and steady. I froze, the paper still in my hand. He took a slow step forward, then another, until he was close enough for me to smell the smoke on his clothes. He glanced at the statement, then back at me. "You really don't know when to leave things alone, do you?" My mouth was dry, words stuck in my throat. "Why is my name on your bank records?" I finally forced out. His smile widened, but it wasn't a smile of humor. It was the kind of smile a wolf gives before it tears flesh. "You'll find out soon enough," he whispered. "But you won't like it." Then he snatched the paper from my hand, crumpled it, and stuffed it into his pocket before walking out without another word. I stood there, breathless, the air suddenly colder. Whatever my brother was tangled up in, it wasn't just bad decisions or petty resentment. It was something calculated, something dangerous. And it had my name written all over it. I knew then that Michael wasn't just pushing me away. He was covering up something that could destroy me. And I realized with absolute certainty, my brother had already crossed a line. The only question was how far I was willing to go to expose him. That night I couldn't shake the image of Michael's grin as he tore the truth from my hands. The sound of the crumpled paper still echoed in my ears. He wasn't just hiding something, he was taunting me, daring me to dig deeper. And I knew then I couldn't sit idle. If Michael wanted to turn this into a war, I would meet him on the battlefield. The first step was strategy. Direct confrontation wasn't working. He thrived on intimidation, on making me second-guess myself. So I decided to turn the tables. If Michael had secrets buried, I needed to bring them to the surface where everyone could see. The next morning at breakfast, I watched him stroll into the kitchen, freshly showered, pretending the night before hadn't happened. He dropped into a chair and started buttering toast like we were back to being brothers. But I caught the flicker of unease in his eyes when he realized I was staring straight at him. "Going somewhere?" I asked casually. He glanced up. "Work." "Which one?" I asked. His hand froze over his plate for just a second before he recovered. "You asking for a job application or something?" Mom looked between us nervously, clearly sensing the tension. Dad pretended not to notice, rustling his newspaper too loudly. And I knew then, if I was going to take Michael down, I couldn't just gather proof quietly. I had to expose him where no one could look away. So I waited until that evening, when our parents settled in front of the TV. Michael was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone, smug as ever. I pulled my own phone from my pocket and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Hey, Mom, Dad, did you know Michael's been moving money around with my name on it?" The silence was instant and brutal. Mom turned to me, eyes wide. Dad lowered his paper slowly. And Michael sat up, his expression snapping from lazy amusement to pure fury. "What the hell are you talking about?" he snapped. "You heard me," I said, locking eyes with him. I saw the statements. You're taking out cash, attaching my name. Care to explain? For a moment his mask slipped, and I caught it. A flash of fear, quick and sharp. But he recovered fast, leaning back with a laugh. You've lost it, man. Maybe the city fried your brain. You think I've got time to play accountant with your name? Please. But Mom looked shaken. Dad frowned, his jaw tight. They weren't dismissing it, not entirely. And that was all I needed. Go ahead, I said, holding up my phone. I'll just show them the messages you deleted from the group chat. The ones that disappeared conveniently before I came back. Michael's eyes went cold. He shot up from the couch so fast the remote clattered to the floor. You don't know what you're messing with, he hissed, stepping close enough for me to smell the whiskey on his breath. I didn't back down. For the first time in years, I stood my ground against him. Then enlighten me, I said quietly, because whatever this is, you're dragging me into it whether I like it or not. The room was taut with silence. Mom's hands trembled in her lap. Dad's gaze flicked between us, torn between suns. And then Michael did something I hadn't expected. He smiled, slow and venomous. You want answers? He said. Fine. Tomorrow. Meet me at O'Malley's noon. I'll show you exactly what's going on. But don't say I didn't warn you. He stormed out, the door slamming behind him, leaving the house rattling with the aftershock. I stood there, my pulse racing, knowing full well I had just forced his hand. The confrontation was no longer private, it was public, it was real, and it was escalating. Tomorrow at noon, my brother and I would finally stand face to face. And I had no idea if I'd walk away the same man. The next day I arrived at O'Malley's just before noon, the bar's neon sign buzzing faintly against the midday sun. My hands were slick with sweat as I pushed open the heavy wooden door. The smell of stale beer and smoke wrapped around me, and somewhere in the back, a jukebox hummed a song no one was listening to. Michael was already there, leaning against the bar with a drink in hand. He looked too calm, too rehearsed, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. When he saw me, he smirked. Right on time, he said. I walked toward him, keeping my voice steady. You said you'd show me what's going on. So show me. He took a slow sip from his glass, then set it down with a deliberate click. You always thought you were the golden boy, he said, loud enough that a couple of patrons turned to look. The one who left made something of himself, while I stayed behind to clean up the mess. But the truth is, Danny, you're not so clean. You've been part of this whether you realize it or not. Confusion twisted in my gut. What are you talking about? He pulled out his phone, scrolled, then held the screen in front of my face. My name was there, Daniel Carter, attached to a string of transactions I'd never authorized. Payments funneled into accounts I didn't recognize, withdrawals stacked in my name. You see, Michael said, his voice sharper now, carrying through the bar. You've been laundering money without even knowing it. And guess who's been covering for you? He jabbed a thumb at his chest. Me. The room tilted. My stomach turned to ice. That's impossible. I never touched any of this. Michael leaned closer, his breath hot with whiskey. Maybe not. But the way I set it up, the way I tied your name to everything, it doesn't matter. On paper, it's you. If this ever blows up, you're the one going down. Not me. The bar seemed to shrink around us. A few men at a nearby table had gone quiet, their eyes darting toward us, sensing the storm breaking in front of them. You did this to me? My voice cracked, but I didn't care. Your own brother? Michael's smile was cruel. Not my problem, remember? The words hit like a blade. The same ones he'd sent in the chat, now delivered face to face with venom. I stood frozen, the weight of betrayal pressing down until I could hardly breathe. But then something inside me shifted. If Michael thought he had me cornered, if he thought fear would paralyze me, he was wrong. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my own phone. I tapped the screen, and his smugness flickered when he realized the red dot was glowing. I've been recording since I walked in, I said, my voice steady now. Every word you just said. Every admission. It's all saved. The smirk vanished. His face hardened, jaw clenched. You think anyone will believe you? I leaned in close enough for only him to hear. They don't have to believe me. They just have to hear you. His hand twitched like he wanted to grab the phone from me, but he froze, aware of the eyes now fixed on us. The room wasn't just a bar anymore. It was a witness. You'll regret this, he whispered, his voice low and venomous. Maybe, I said, but not as much as you will. I turned and walked out, my heart pounding, my fingers wrapped tight around the phone in my pocket. For the first time, I wasn't running from Michael's shadow. I was dragging him into the light. But as the bar door slammed behind me, I knew this wasn't over. Exposing him meant war, and wars don't end clean. The showdown had only begun. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's face, twisted with rage when he realized I had recorded him. His words echoed in my head like a drumbeat. "You'll regret this." By morning, I knew the choice was no longer mine. I couldn't hide what I'd uncovered. Silence would make me complicit. I drove back to my parents' house, the phone heavy in my pocket. Mom was at the table with her tea, Dad beside her, half hidden by the morning paper. Michael's chair was empty. "Where's Mike?" I asked. Mom's eyes flickered nervously. "He left early." Of course he had. Running, hiding, maybe planning his next move. I didn't give him the chance. I set my phone on the table and pressed play. The recording filled the kitchen, Michael's voice, clear and undeniable. His taunts, his confession, the way he had tied my name to his crimes. The words rang through the room like hammer blows. When it ended, silence fell. Mom's hands shook around her cup. Dad's face was carved from stone. "Is this true?" Mom whispered. I nodded slowly. Every word. For a long moment no one spoke. And then the front door slammed, and Michael's voice cut through the house. "Turn that off." He stormed into the kitchen, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw clenched tight. He looked at me, then at our parents, and for the first time I saw something I'd never seen in him before: fear. "You've ruined everything," he spat. "No, Mike," I said quietly. "You ruined yourself." Dad rose from his chair, slow but steady. "Enough," he said, his voice carrying more weight than I'd ever heard. "You used your brother's name. You dragged this family into your mess. No more." Michael's gaze darted between us, wild and cornered. For a moment I thought he might lash out, but then his shoulders sagged. He looked small, deflated. And then he walked out without another word, the sound of the door slamming behind him final and hollow. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could have been. Mom wept quietly into her hands. Dad sat back down, his eyes far away. And I sat there, phone in my hand, feeling both victorious and broken. Because revenge doesn't come clean. It leaves a mark, even when you win. In the days that followed, the fallout unfolded quickly. My parents cut ties with Michael, at least for now. I handed over the recordings and the bank statements to the proper people, making sure my name was cleared. Michael vanished into the shadows he had built for himself. And me? I stayed in that house for a while longer, walking its creaking halls, remembering the childhood we had shared before betrayal poisoned everything. One evening, sitting alone on the porch, I thought about you, the one listening to my story now. I thought about how families look solid from the outside, but sometimes the cracks have been there all along, hidden until the right light shines through. If you've stayed with me through this journey, if you felt the sting of betrayal in your own life, then you know what I mean when I say, silence isn't safety. Sometimes the only way to heal is to drag the truth into the open, no matter how much it hurts. So if this story struck you, if it made you lean forward and hold your breath the way I did living it, then don't just walk away. Like this video, subscribe. Stay with me, because there are more stories buried in the quiet corners of family life than you could ever imagine. And as I sat there on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the trees, I thought of roots. Some grow deep and strong, holding the earth together. Others rot beneath the soil, unseen, until the whole tree falls. In the end, all you can do is decide which roots to nourish and which ones to cut away.